There's a difference between being a fighter and being a problem solver and being an advocate. My goal has been to try to not just put band-aids on large issues. If you come in with the mindset of I need to win, then everyone's already lost. Our goal was to take things to trial and start setting precedents. If you're about to go fight for somebody's civil rights, this is an opportunity to solve the issue. This is the time to really put on your advocate hat. It doesn't work if we're not actually in a mindset to get things resolved.
This is The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadeo. My guest today is a problem solver in the truest sense of the word, leveraging a diverse career that spans the defense of Fortune 100 corporations to the fight for civil rights with the ACLU and the Innocence Project. A former law firm partner who has successfully navigated high-stakes litigation and complex commercial disputes, she now serves as operations counsel for a leading provider of arbitration and mediation services. It's my pleasure to welcome Dafney Dubuisson Stokes to the podcast. Welcome, Dafney, and thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Dafney, as you know, I love to start by asking each of my guests either to share either a fun fact or about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
So I'd love to share a fun fact about myself.
Please.
So I love to travel. That's, essentially the fun fact. A few years ago, my husband and I decided that we would make traveling a priority for our family. So since then, we've managed to go to about 5 or 6 different countries, and we are on track to continue traveling next year. As you know, I'm part of the FDCC and we'll be in Portugal this summer. So we are finally taking our children with us this time, and they're very excited to join our travels. So we've been to some really fun places and have had some really fun and interesting experiences, including walking into places that we probably shouldn't have been in. But at the end of the day, it's definitely something that we think is important for our lives and to expose our children to.
That's so cool. I agree completely, Daphne, because it's such a huge world out there, and there's while there are many similarities, there are also many differences, and just having a firsthand look at those diverse perspectives and how people live their lives in different parts of the world is so important. Is there any particular country or any experience that that you thought was particularly interesting or entertaining?
Oh, well, my favorite place that we went to was France. We went to the coast, and that was an incredibly fun experience. The experience I was thinking about when I mentioned earlier is we were in Paris, and my husband, so I'm one of those people when I travel, I don't actually necessarily care what I do. I just get very excited to just be in a different place, as long as I get to eat the great food and talk to the people, I wander the streets, and I'm having a great time. My husband, on the other hand, is we need to go to all of the different, places and see all of the things. And typically I just kind of follow him wherever he takes me. And one time we were in Paris, and I followed him into a store, and it was a bookstore. And as we're walking around the store, I'm just looking at the titles, and I speak French or conversational French. And I'm looking at the titles and I'm reading in this, and then my husband does not speak French. And he's getting really excited. And slowly it's starting to dawn on me that this isn't a normal bookstore. It turned out just from the titles of the books, I finally said to my husband, do you know what that title says? And I translated for him. We were in some weird alt-right kind of not very friendly.
Oh, no.
That we had just walked into, and we look over after not paying attention. We were the only people in there, and the person sitting behind the counter was just shooting daggers at
Mm.
us. And we just kind of put the book down and just slowly walked out of the store and said maybe, and I said to him, and this is what I get for just walking around and not paying any attention to where we're going. Now we're ending up at these crazy locations. And then from then on, I became responsible for translating the names of the stores and places we went to before we actually showed up there.
That's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that, Dafney. That was an experience, I'm sure.
It was an experience, yes. I don't let him live it down to this day. I still tell him, oh yeah, remember that time in Paris when you dragged us into that store?
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks again for sharing that, Dafney. And I just moving on to the sort of the next question. I really do think of every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast as a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story, and I'd love to hear yours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm from this little southern town called Miami, in case you haven't heard about it. So yes, not so little, not so southern. Yeah, my story, it really starts with kind of being like a first generation child of immigrants, right? Like I feel like it's just these stories sometimes you hear people tell. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I am first generation. My mother brought us here to the United States when I was 5 years old. And the one thing that I will say that I feel like kind of shaped my entire childhood and also kind of directly leads me to where I am right now is kind of this whole concept of like processes and systems, right? Like being able to navigate these systems, the legal, financial, educational systems, and watching my family go through them. And these were not always designed for people like us, people who didn't speak the language, who didn't necessarily have the education to kind of work our way through them, right? And so as a kid, I was able to kind of, well, first, it was very hard, necessarily being like 8 years old and trying to, translate for your mom and work your way through those when you're that young. But one thing I learned really early on was these systems are in place. They are not always user friendly. They're not always intuitive. And so, it's that kind of thinking combined with the fact that my mom said you're either going to be a doctor, lawyer, or nurse, or was a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Really kind of propelled me to start thinking about what I want to be when I grow up. What does that look like? And leading me to kind of the legal profession, right? So, like I said, I grew up in Miami, went to, a small Catholic school there, and then, went to the big city of Boston for undergrad. And there I saw snow for the very first time in my life, and have stayed in the Northeast ever since. When I was at BC, I was a psych major, and one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to help people. And I think that that's been true no matter what I've done in my life. I wanted to help people, and I actually became a social worker. I graduated with a degree in psychology. I transitioned to working with nonprofit agencies. Within the nonprofit agencies, I worked with children who had special needs, who had mental and emotional difficulties. I fell in love with that entire population. I still love working with kids and being around them, so I still do that today, even though that's not necessarily my focus. And then as I did this more and more, I was a social worker for about 10 years. I started thinking, okay, I really want to help people, but sometimes it's felt like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, right? Like you see the problems, you see the difficulties, and you just feel like you're just throwing, little Band-Aids at them, and you're not necessarily hitting the systematic problematic issues that are leading you here in the first place. And that kind of reignited this desire for me to go to law school, which was, I want to say always the plan, but you get sidetracked, in life. And I remember having a conversation with my brother, and he said, what was the plan? And me saying, the plan was always to be a lawyer. And he's like, well, what's stopping you? And nothing was stopping me, So I went to law school, and I've been, as you said, problem solving ever since, right? Like ever since I graduated from law school, as a litigator, as you said, working with the Innocence Project, working at the ACLU as a fellow, and then later on working as a litigator. My goal has been to try to not just put band-aids on large issues. My goal has been to try to figure out the best way to problem solve, and sometimes, in my opinion, that means working together, working cooperatively, not necessarily working adversarially in order to come to a conclusion. I think that we as a people just simply do better when we work cooperatively. And so, I mean, that's kind of how I've gotten to where I am after being a partner for about 5 years at Wong Fleming. I just hit a transition in my life where I kind of needed to figure out where to go next. Did I want to continue the litigation portion of my life, or did I want to transition to something else? And I knew that I wanted to continue problem solving, but in a more cooperative way. I wanted to leave the adversarial world behind, and that's kind of how I found myself where I am now.
That's fantastic, Dafney. I mean, there's such a logical train of thought to everything that you shared in terms of just a couple of things that stood out for me. Right, one is your strong desire to help people from the beginning, and that sort of dovetails very nicely into your work that you did pre-law school. And quick sidebar there, was that the time when you were with the ACLU and or the Innocence Project before law school, or was that after?
That was immediately after law school. It was during law school and immediately after.
I see.
So when I went to law school, again, just looking for opportunities to kind of get involved. I went to Temple in Philadelphia, and it has an Innocence Project clinic. It has a clinic that you can join, and I joined the clinic and started working there under Professor Bluestein, who was great. She was the director of the Innocence Project for a very long time down there. And I worked there for a little while, for several years while I was in law school. And then immediately thereafter, like immediately upon graduating, I started working at the ACLU.
That's great. So I think it's a great combination of your desire to help people, and that's what you did as a social worker, and then through the Innocence Project and the ACLU, and then understanding that there are these systems that those people who need help need to be able to navigate, and that's where I presume the law school part of it came, because once you become an attorney, you develop an understanding of the system by definition, and so if you can combine your law school skills with your desire to help people, I think that just makes a lot of sense. And then the third part, which also made sense to me, is your desire to maybe not be in such adversarial situations, and maybe help or be in more collaborative situations, which is where the whole mediation, arbitration, I presume, that comes through. So that's great. That's a wonderful story and thread, and thank you for sharing that. Let's go a little bit into some of those individual pieces. So what kind of work did you do while you were at ACLU and at the Innocence Project?
Well, the Innocence Project is pretty self-explanatory. So, we would get, part of the work that I did there was, we were very low level. So keep in mind, this was in law school, and a lot of our job, my particular job and my team, was we would get assigned files. And our job was to literally sit and go through the files, reading all of the information, reading all of the witness accounts and the court documents and things like that. And we would, so this would be a very intensive review of the information that were provided. So if you are familiar with the Innocence Project, inmates would apply for this chance for us to take a look at their documentation, everything that we would, that they had access to during their trial, and things that they might not even have had access to. I mean, we don't know, right? So we would take a look at everything, and then my team, all of us, would then write a report detailing whether or not we believe that this particular inmate, we need to take another look. Like, we need to take a deeper look, and we need to bring this up the chain to the team. At the time, I wasn't a licensed attorney, so we couldn't necessarily do anything, but we could then take it to the attorneys. So we did this, we would get assigned a package, and we would have, a couple of months to kind of go through it and really, and when I say really go through it, we would be encouraged to go visit the site, go take a look and see, look around, take pictures, call people, talk to people, really try to figure out what happened here. And then make a determination, and we would give our advice, our gut feeling, and based on the information provided, we think that this deserves a deeper look. And we would take it to the board, and the board would make a decision moving forward. And then, so we were there from the ground floor. At the ACLU, I was a fellow, and while I was there, I actually didn't get to do too much because I joined in, and immediately we were preparing to go to trial. So I jumped in and started prepping for trial. Actually, that was my very, very first trial experience ever.
That's great.
And so I jumped in right out of law school with a brand new shiny degree and shiny license. And they said, here, we're about to go to trial, and you're about to go fight for somebody's civil rights. And I will say the trial was not what I was expecting. When you hear about the ACLU, you think of these really big cases, and it was a big case because it was a freedom of speech. It was a First Amendment matter, but it was, in the grand scheme of things, just, a kind of a small step, right? And I think that it always takes me back to kind of the world we're living in now, kind of the political landscape. And you think about these little tiny erosions, that happen, and you don't feel them, and you might not think that it's a big deal, but it's the small erosions that, when put together, start to make, a big step back from how we're supposed to be looking at things. So the case that I worked on, and that was my very first trial, was a First Amendment freedom of speech case, and it had to do with a high school student that was going to a public school who tried to express herself and was not being allowed to do so because the school said it was a violation of their policies, and we couldn't figure out why based on the information. So I got to take the case to trial and do my first witness and cross and all of that for the first time, and got my first compliment from a judge. So that really kind of hyped me up a little bit. So we did things like that. I did a lot of research and writing, but for the most part, our goal was to take things to trial and start setting precedents if we could.
That's amazing, and I'm sure that sort of set the stage for your litigation experience, subsequently, which was
Yes.
great. So maybe segueing into that. So after you spent time at the ACLU at the Innocence Project, then you moved to various law firms, including Wong Fleming, where you were there until recently, until actually when we had just met back in earlier in the summer. So can you tell me a little bit about your time at Wong Fleming, the work that you did there, and sort of what your trajectory was within that firm?
Sure. I started working at that firm as an associate. I was there for about 10 years in total. And so when I walked in, I was still kind of a newbie. I had worked at firms before, but really on a part-time basis. So right after I left the ACLU, I ended up having a baby, and I was kind of stayed home with him for about a year or so. And then I slowly started transitioning back into the workforce, working kind of part-time. So Wong Fleming was the first full-time, legal position I got once my son was just in daycare and things like that. So I was there for about 10 years. We did commercial litigation and defense, right? So we defended Fortune 100 companies, so top 100 companies in the nation. And a lot of the work had to do at the very beginning. When I first started, I did a lot of creditors' rights, but as time went on, it was able to expand my practice as I got more and more experience, and the laws were constantly changing. By the time that I left, I was their kind of regulatory expert, right? I used to do a lot of financial services litigation. So most of my clients were banks and financial institutions, credit card companies, things like that. And a lot of my job was defending them when they would get sued under these federal regulations that they might have been falling afoul of without even realizing sometimes, or sometimes maybe they did, but a lot of my job was kind of defending them or helping them figure out ways to not get in get sued or have any sort of liability for failing to put the systems in place that would allow them to follow the regulations properly. So I did that for the majority of my time at Wong Fleming, right up until, as you said, this summer when I transitioned in-house to working at Forthright.
Fantastic. We'll come to your Forthright experience in a minute. For the attorneys listening, for the earlier career attorneys listening, I think it would be interesting, if Dafney, if you could share sort of how you were able to navigate the transition in terms of the subject matter that you dealt with. Clearly, you dealt with some, very important civil rights type matters, in your prior work, and then you moved to, defending these banks and working with larger corporations. What was that switch like?
It was not as hard as you would think. And I think that's one thing that, I think a younger attorney coming in needs to know. It's scary. I think it is very scary, for people to say, well, I've been doing the same thing for so long and I don't know how I can just go do something different. And I actually see that question a lot. I'm part of some, women's organizations, women lawyer organizations, and that is one of the biggest questions that we get as an organization. I see young female lawyers who are now mothers, or now they want to know, well, I've been doing litigation for so long and it's so labor intensive and time intensive, but now I'd like to transition to something else, but it's terrifying because I've never done XYZ before. How do I do that? It's not as hard as you would think. And the reason I say that is this is what we do, right? We are attorneys. This is what we do. We are good on our feet and we are good at thinking things through, and we're good critical thinkers. I think that those are some of the skills that really makes a good attorney. You take those same skills and you apply them to yourself. And you apply them to the fact that you are trying to learn a new subject matter. Coming from things like, kind of family related or civil rights related, criminal related. I will say this, I never was able to wrap my head around the criminal procedures, no matter how hard I tried. So maybe it might have been easier for me because I would get lost completely in criminal court. But civil court was a lot easier for me. But I just used those same skills and applied them to myself. And I said, okay, I started working at Wong Fleming. First, I started working there because I wanted the stability of having a law firm job and a full-time job. And this is what they needed. They needed someone to be on their financial services team, and I wasn't going to say no. So I took the job and I set about learning financial services litigation, reading what I could, reading articles, learning about the regulations that they were dealing with, learning about the regulations that the clients were dealing with. If the client had a problem, my answer was never, I have no idea what you're talking about. My answer was always, that is an interesting question. Let me go take a look at some documents and I'll get right back to you. And I would go and figure it out. Again, it goes right back to kind of the problem solving stage, right? Your clients have a problem and it's your job to solve it. And you figure it out. You read the books. I took CLEs. And I educated myself on different areas of the law. And the more I did it, and as more repetitive that it got, the better I got at it, the more intuitive I was. And by the time I left, like I said, by the time I left the firm, people were coming to me asking me questions about certain statutes and the nuances and case law. And I knew the cases off the top of my head, and I can tell you, we can't do that based on the most recent information that came out. And also as I got better, I started writing and I started teaching CLEs on the subject. So I made myself an expert on the things that my clients needed me to know by simply applying the same skills that helped me be successful in other areas of my life.
That's so amazing, Dafney, because I mean, one thing that you shared there, among all the things was, hey, you have a certain toolkit, but can you turn that onto yourself? Can you shine the spotlight back onto yourself and analyze yourself in the same way that you would analyze a document or a brief or or anything else that's in front of you. So that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. Moving on now to your most recent move, which is to Forthright. So can you tell us a little bit about what Forthright does, what your role is there, and what prompted you to shift?
Sure, absolutely. So Forthright is part of a greater company called Forum that provides arbitration and mediation services, as you explained before. It is based out of Minneapolis, and Forthright is the New Jersey arm. And we are the exclusive provider of PIP arbitration in the state of New Jersey. So if there is some sort of accident or injury or something that goes on and it is PIP related, a lot of these insurance companies have some sort of arbitration clause in it, and generally we are the ones that will provide those arbitration services.
That's great. And so your role at Forthright is operations counsel. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and how is that similar to or different from what you've done in the past, most recently with long employment?
Sure, absolutely. So the fun fact is when I applied for this job, I had absolutely no clue what an operations counsel actually did. But I have since learned, right? So what attracted me to the position, honestly, the very first thing that attracted me to the position was what Forthright did. I am very passionate about alternative dispute resolution, about mediation, arbitration, alternative ways in order to get to the same conclusion you would get to if you went to court and did trial work. So, I was a certified mediator for a very long time, so I understand how that process works. So that was the first thing that attracted me to even just looking at this company and seeing, was there a position for me? The second thing is once I kind of understood what the Operations Council did, I thought, oh, this is great. This is exactly up my alley. So part of what I do is I help Forthright come up with, their processes, right? Number one, the processes for working with our users across the state of New Jersey. There literally thousands of arbitrations are filed in a day here. So we process a lot of information, and we have a lot of users and clients that we service, right? The people who use our systems, they are our clients. And so one of the things that is my responsibility for is making sure that that entire process runs smoothly. Another thing that I do having to do with working with the company itself is I help to set kind of the strategic future and vision of what the company looks like. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to see ourselves? What new pathways are out there? What's going on with innovations out there? What can we bring to Forthright to help make sure that we are competitive in the market, that we are, staying in line with the practical guidance, the newest guidance, the newest information. So, and then, most, just as important, but just probably not seen as much, but working with the employees here and making sure that their jobs are easy. I'm able to take the load off of kind of them and making sure that the process is in place to keep the company running is efficient, it's fair, and that they're able to see the value in the work that they do as well. And very lastly, but again, not as least, but I also manage the litigation. So if there is any litigation within Forthright that needs to be handled, I would also handle that as well.
Wow, that's a lot of hats. So external facing, that's great. I mean, it's wonderful. External facing efficiencies, internal efficiencies, strategic direction, and then litigation at a high level. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. I would imagine, Dafney, that no conversation around efficiency in the legal space is sort of complete without technology or AI coming into the mix. And you mentioned briefly innovation. So can you maybe share a little bit about, what Forthright does or how Forthright includes or looks at technology, including AI, in terms of the services that it provides?
Sure. We are very technology focused here. I mean, I don't think anything that we do is possible if we weren't very technology heavy. We have a great IT and tech department that is focused on what I consider very innovative practices. I mean, if you even just go on our website, like I said, we process thousands of arbitrations daily, right? That is not possible unless we have the systems in place to make that happen, including the technology to make it happen. So you can have as many great, rules and systems as possible. If you don't have the technology that can support that level of work, that it's just going to fall apart. So, we have a user portal that people can sign up for, that we actually just did a complete overhaul of the portal system right when I started over the summer. So I've been learning how to use it. We have on the back end, on the inside, that the users don't even see, our own kind of portal system that helps us process all the documents and keep everything going. I think as somebody that did litigation and did arbitration before, I appreciate the level of efficiency that we have here, because I remember having to, I'm not even going to get to having to mail things in, but you're emailing everything back and forth with the arbitrator and the person that's working there, and maybe you might be using Outlook and things. We have gone beyond those systems, right? Like, we have completely gone beyond those systems. We are able to manage a large volume of work with a very small staff of people. And I think that's incredible. And part of my job is to make sure that we can keep that going, right? As far as I'm concerned, if it's not broke, nothing to fix, right? So it's not necessarily a matter of coming up with new systems. It's making sure that the current technology that we have continues to move forward. And in terms of AI, I think that is, the big elephant in the room, right? Like, so many, I've been reading recently about other arbitration companies who are starting to incorporate AI into their arbitration process, including having AI start making arbitration decisions and things like that. And I think that that's fascinating. I know that we are open to the use of AI, and we're certainly looking at incorporating AI into our processes. We don't currently have that process in place, but we are aware of the other companies and how they're using it. And so it's definitely something that we are open to and looking to see how best to use it on our end. Like, what ways would work for us in particular, and the kind of niche that we have. Like I said, Forthright is very niche in that it serves really the state of New Jersey, and it really serves kind of this no-fault auto insurance area, whereas Forum is a bigger company that serves more of nationally. So especially for us here with our niche practice, we need to see how we could best utilize AI in order to kind of help our users use the process a little bit more efficiently.
Makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, Dafney, is that you say it's a niche, one state only practice, but then you have thousands of arbitrations being processed per day. So is that all only in the state of New Jersey? Those thousands of arbitrations?
That is only in the state of New Jersey, and your shock is exactly what I went through when I was looking. No, you're absolutely right, because you say to yourself, "Well, what is happening in the state of New Jersey?" Right? I completely agree with you, but yes, that is accurate.
That's amazing, and so it makes total sense that you want to be focused on efficiency. You want the people and the processes to be as streamlined as you want the processes to be as streamlined as possible for the people using them, and then technology serving as an aid wherever appropriate. That's amazing, Dafney. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Just a couple of quick questions to wrap it up for us here. So, if in terms of guidance that you would give someone who maybe feels like they've been wronged or in a dispute, or what is the most common mistake that you see, maybe litigators make when they enter like a mediation or arbitration process? And so, what sort of mindset shift from a litigator's perspective do they have to, would you advise them to keep in mind as they enter, the ADR world, so to speak?
I think the greatest issue that I've come across, or what I consider to be one of the greatest errors, is coming in with the desire to not resolve it, or coming in and realizing that this is a different skill set than necessarily being I think there was something, we talked earlier about being like a fighter, right? Like there's a difference between being a fighter and being a problem solver and being an advocate, right? You can be an advocate and not necessarily be a fighter. When you go into something like arbitration or you go into something like mediation, this is an opportunity to solve the issue. This is not necessarily the opportunity to bare your fangs and decide that I'm going to, dig into the ground and, try my case to the nth degree. And there are times for that. There's absolutely times for that. I just don't necessarily think that alternative dispute is the time for that. This is the time to really put on your advocate hat. And this is not saying to ignore your client's wishes or necessarily not fight hard for your client, but there is a way to do that in a more advocacy role as opposed to more of the fighting role, right? So I think this is an opportunity for litigators and lawyers to come together and say, okay, we both have these positions. We can both articulate these positions in really good ways, and we can both provide the case law and the backing for these positions. Now let's put our hats on together and figure out how we can work this out. And so the biggest issue that I've come across is when these sessions are unproductive because someone or both parties show up and they have absolutely no desire to do that. And in which case, I think you're just wasting everyone's time, right? Like if that's what you're going to do, then there's really no point in it. It doesn't work if we're not actually in a mindset to get things resolved, and we're not in the mindset to solve this problem. If you come in with the mindset of I need to win, then everyone's already lost, unfortunately. And I think that that's the biggest hurdle, I think, to making arbitration or mediation or any sort of alternative dispute successful.
That makes a lot of sense, Dafney. Thank you for sharing that. If you were now to think about, advice that you would give to a junior attorney, I know we spoke about this in a very specific context of making, a switch from one background or, one's knowledge base to another. But in general, if you're looking at someone, or if I'm someone who's sort of, just out of law school trying to figure out against this, technological, societal, legal landscape that we have specifically today, and trying to figure out what the path ahead for me is, what advice would you give to someone like that?
I would say don't be afraid to try something that doesn't seem like what you went to law school for, right? I think a lot of times people, they go to law school and they have an idea of, I want to do this, right? And so, I think with our current necessary economic landscape and the way things are, I think people need to be more kind of flexible in being able to pivot. And also, you're not really sure what you're going to be good at and what you're going to like until you've given things a try, right? If you leave law school and say, all I want to do is I want to work for big law and I want to, make hundreds of thousands of dollars and I want, I want to do contracts. Okay, and that's all well and good. I'm not saying that you can't do that, but don't be afraid to look elsewhere. Don't be afraid to look at the boutique firms or look at the specialty firms or look at something. I'll tell you this, I never once, the entire time I was at Wong Fleming, did anything to do with insurance. And so the fact that I ended up in a company that primarily handles, I know it's arbitration, but it's primarily insurance based. Like I'm learning a new language when I look at these filings and just wrapping my head around just what they're even talking about. And I never thought I would be doing something like that. It is within a field that I'm interested in, but it's just a completely different area of the law than anything that I ever worked in before. And again, it's about not necessarily being scared to try something different and just kind of seeing what else is out there. I think being flexible, not being afraid to pivot, and not being afraid to try something new. So that would be my advice, is to try it, see what you think. You might be surprised. The law is so varied that I think that, kids go to law school these days, or young people go to law school these days, and they have a very specific idea of what it means. And there's so much you can do with your law degree, and there's so much that we can use our skills for. And I think people should kind of take a look at that a little bit more.
That's wonderful. In terms of giving guidance to law school students or other earlier career attorneys, one of the other roles that you played, Dafney, is served as an educator. So served as an adjunct professor teaching litigation skills. I also read a recent comment from you on LinkedIn, I believe it was, where it was something that you shared is close to your heart. So can you share a little bit more about sort of that background and your interest in sort of educating law school students in a more formal setting, in addition to the advice
Yeah.
you just gave?
So I always said if I didn't become a lawyer, I'd be an educator because I love teaching. I love teaching. I like to teach. Um, I like to learn. I think I like teaching because I like to learn. And um, I'm sorry, I just blanked for 1 second.
Yeah,
But
then
yeah,
take your time. Yeah, no worries.
okay, I apologize. But yes, I love to teach. I'm good at teaching. And that's definitely one thing. Every once in a while, you are able to say, "This is definitely something that I know that I'm good at. I'm very good at it," and kind of breaking things down into smaller pieces for people to understand. Um, and I do it first because it's something that I just enjoy doing, and secondly because I just remember growing up and sometimes not really understanding something, or even just in my career, right? Like I'll get something and I just don't get it. And going to those who should know, and they have such a hard time being able to explain. I think because sometimes when you have been doing something for such a long time, or you're just really good at it and you're just kind of on automatic pilot, it's sometimes really hard to look at somebody that has no clue what's going on and being able to break it down for them in a way that they understand. And so because I just remember that feeling of saying, you know what, fine, I'll just go figure it out myself. Um, that I try when I come across younger attorneys or even young people in general who have questions, and really just breaking down a complex and difficult concept in a way that I think that they can understand and can be relatable to them. And I follow that in my life. I have two young boys and they're very curious and they're always asking questions, and I try not to baby them, but I try to make sure that I'm explaining. Sometimes they'll ask me big questions, and I'll try to make sure that I'm explaining it in a way that they understand. I take that same skill to my law students, right? I take it to them and I try to explain things in a way that they understand, from basic concepts of how do I practice law? Like, what do I do? A lot of times, I think people forget that law school teaches you legal concepts, but it might not necessarily teach you how to practice. I've taught basics such as how do I write a persuasive email? A law student might not understand that. How do I go and negotiate this settlement? What is the tone that I use? How do I approach it? What number should I start at? Where should I end? And I will, teach these concepts of, okay, mathematically speaking, let's talk about it that way. And then let's talk about it. What does your client want? And explaining the client's needs and how you talk to your client, right? Do you need to go bring them bad news? So it's more than just the legal concepts. And I've taught those as well, like just legal concepts. Um, but also how to navigate this profession in a way that is not overwhelming, and that makes it more intuitive for them to understand.
That's great, and I'm sure the feeling of satisfaction when you see someone go from a place of frustration or not understanding something, and you're leading them to a place where they their eyes light up and they get it. I'm sure that's very satisfying as well.
Oh yeah, like I light up like a prod mom. I love it. I love to see it. I love to see, an associate that I've worked with, come back and tell me, oh my gosh, I just took my first deposition and all of the things that you told me, how to prepare it and the concepts that we went over, it was so helpful, and I love it.
That's wonderful. Final question for you, Dafney. Is there a question that I should have asked you but I didn't?
I think you did a pretty good job asking me all the questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's great. Well, Dafney, this has been a wonderful, engaging, informative discussion. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that as well.
Take care.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.